Welcome to this week's edition of Novara. My name's Aaron Peters. This week I'm joined by Mark Fisher, author of Capitalist Realism. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
We're going to discuss a number of issues that are sort of quite pertinent to capitalist realism, and then sort of use it as context for a few issues of relevance to listeners, issues that have sort of unfolded over the last few years. So things like, obviously, the global financial crisis, and then also sort of use it as a context for more recent events like the student movement and the London riots. The England riots, sorry. That's a bit of London centrism from me. Mark, maybe you could just start with a sort of a brief elucidation of what is capitalist realism for the listener.
Yeah, it's strange, actually, when people ask me to define it, and whenever I'm writing a piece where I have to define it, it's actually quite difficult. It's easy to recognise, it's harder to define, actually. Because capitalist realism, I would say, is, and what I normally say, is related to the belief that there is no alternative to capitalism, really. But it's more about the way that belief is embedded in a whole set of institutional expectations about the structure of work and into everyday life. So to say it's a belief that it's just a sort of merely cognitive thing doesn't really capture what for me is a whole psychic infrastructure, I suppose, which has conditioned life in the UK, in particular, and in the US for the last 25 years to an intensifying degree, I think. I think, the period of the 80s was the period of the struggle for the imposition of capitalist realism. With the defeat of the old labour movement and the collapse of the Soviet system, had both practical effects but also symbolic effects, from which the left has in many ways never recovered, and which has created this situation of complete normalisation of neoliberalism. I mean, I think maybe we should talk a little bit about the difference between neoliberalism and capitalist realism, I suppose, because I think that is coming out at the moment, potentially. And in a way, capitalist realism is both a precondition and an effect of neoliberalism, I think. That neoliberalism had to fight in order to install capitalist realism, in order to impose the idea that capital was the only force that was going to win anything ultimately. That brought with it a sense of temporality, I think, which neoliberalism is very successful in installing. That what I mean by that is the idea, really, that the association of any ideas of the left with being old. So, and with a set of doctrines which practically no one could defend, I think no one would defend now, in a way, such as top-down bureaucracy, centralisation, etc., etc. These were old, passé, old hat, and then therefore a definition of modernity or modernisation, which treated modernisation as synonymous with neoliberalism. We see this in the way labour disputes are covered. The classic one would be the Royal Mail for me. Whenever the intermittent sort of labour struggles over the Royal Mail are covered in the media, what we see is that story being framed as the postal workers are struggling against modernisation, as if modernisation meant exactly the same thing as neoliberalism. And I don't think those workers themselves would see themselves as doing that. Yeah. But the problem, what that highlights is the problem that the sort of hegemonic definition of the modern is and one that's entirely colonised by neoliberalism. And the reflex often on the left is to go back to an older state of affairs, and to try and defend or resuscitate social democracy or older social formations, that there isn't a convincing alternative modernity, and I think that is really key to how capitalist realism has spread, and to the point of total dominance.
I mean, so I would really implore any of the listeners to read, without being obsequious to my guest this week, I would really implore anybody to read Capitalist Realism, because I think it's a really great primer into a number of kind of the more under-examined aspects of neoliberalism, which is a bit of a catch-all term, and maybe we can try and clarify what exactly that means a little bit later on.
Yeah,
but I mean, I think of it as, I think of Jameson and postmodernity, and I think of Ernest Mandel with regards to kind of like Marxian economics that are critiquing the disadoption of the gold standard. We can leave the economics to one side a little bit, perhaps, but I think that notion within Jameson of the postmodern and its cultural logic being that of irony,
yes,
and of a sort of an ethical distance between theory and action,
yes,
is a really, really key sort of aspect of neoliberalism. So maybe we could just quickly also touch on that. So a great example for me, for instance, is when you see people crossing picket lines, and they go like, I'm showing solidarity to these workers, like good luck to you, and then they're crossing the picket line, and there's this kind of distance between action and their sort of intellectual engagement with the position. They're going, by saying something that is sufficient. Well, actually, no, it clearly isn't. Maybe you could just
I think that's a really important dimension of the whole issue of ironic distanciation, and I think is Jameson and Zizek, I think, who bring this out really powerfully. But for me, it's more the opposite case than that kind of gestural support for left. Though I think that's part of the mix. I think the opposite case is more a compliance, a ritualistic compliance with managerialism, or managerialism in a way is applied neoliberalism in the workplace. So people will say, okay, well, we have to do all this stuff. We have to engage in all this business rhetoric. We have to fit in all of these logbooks, which are modelled on kind of private sector practices. Look, we don't believe in it. In our hearts, we're still good social democrats. We think it's all nonsense. We think that public services should be not run as businesses. But come on, this is how things are now. We just have to go along with this. And it's exactly that idea of that. What's important is your inner self in some way, what you privately believe, rather than what you how you publicly behave. And neoliberalism has profited from that belief, particularly amongst, I think, a certain age group of people who feel that they are broadly sympathetic to the old goals of social democracy, but who now feel that the times have changed and that we can't talk that way anymore. But they want to retain their self-image as being on the right side, whilst actually imposing in a disavowed way these neoliberal rituals, I think. And I think we underestimate the power of ritual to our cost, really. That in terms of what I was just talking about, the normalisation of neoliberalism, with its ideas of social atomization, competition, etc. How is that normalisation achieved? How is that kind of ontological hegemony, if you want to put it like that? How is that attained? Well, it is by ritualistic compliance, by changing the rituals, by changing the words people say, I think.
I mean, so let me ask
that's one thing. That's not the sole thing.
No, let me ask you a question then, because I find this very interesting. So, I mean, broadly I agree with you that there's this kind of distanciation, as you put it, with people. And let's say, well, privately I agree with you, but publicly their actions and their gestures sort of signify otherwise. How about then if we talk about neoliberal politics, big P politics? So like when we're talking about modernisation as being synonymous with neoliberalism, if you look at the modernisers of the Labour Party, I'm thinking Alan Milburn, I'm thinking Tony Blair.
Exactly,
I mean, for them this isn't ritual, is it? I mean, for them this is an example. This is realpolitik, and they know exactly what they're doing. Or are they as can we put this as are they also victims in a certain sense, as you and I are, or any unknowing person is on the street of neoliberalism? Or is there a distinction to be made between them and between the sort of rest of us?
It depends on how charitable interpretation one is to take of those people. I probably would take a charitable interpretation, actually. That, I mean, I guess that's why there's emphasis on realism, I suppose.
Yeah.
That, and look, it's not an ethical critique here. I'm not trying to make an ethical critique. I'm not trying to, although it sounds like that, I'm sort of sneering at these sort of well-meaning managers who impose this. I think that the success of neoliberalism was massively overdetermined. And actually, during the 90s, there was very little else that people could do because of that overdetermined success. So, it didn't just look as if it was realistic. At a certain time, if you're certainly within that mainstream parliamentary political world, that was realpolitik. I think, but of course, further constituting things, as it were, going along with what is held to be realistic, isn't just some passive affirmation of an already existing state of affairs. It's a kind of it's a nightmare positive feedback cycle, isn't it? Where the more that people say that the existing state of affairs are the only realistic state of affairs, the more that they become so, as it were. And I think that was the kind of spiral that people were in. I'd be prepared, like I say, to take a charitable view of those kind of individuals that they thought, okay, we're up against immense forces of capital now. We're on the back foot. How do we gain any sort of concessions?
So who's the vanguard of this as an intellectual project then? For it to have become so strong, if these people like Milburn, Blair, are as great a victim as anybody else in terms of internalising these cultural norms and not recognising them for what they are, where's the vanguard that made this seemingly sort of undefeatable kind of project, so it seemed for a very long time? Where is it catalysed? I mean, where's the kind of lens? Because, I mean, there's a lot of talk of, like, neoliberalism in the 50s and 60s. There is a certain almost Leninist vanguard that's championing it. Yeah, no, I think you are looking at ironically, a successful Leninist project, that has its history going back to the 40s. I mean, it's I think one of the interesting lessons about neoliberalism. There's many interesting lessons to learn about it. One of which is the amount of time that was required. From something which was absolutely unrealistic to something which is the only possible realism, or was up till 2008. And we can learn from that. That when Hayek was a pariah, the idea that his ideas would gain the dominance they would have was science fiction, and I think it remained science fiction up until the 70s. It wasn't just in the 40s or 50s when these ideas were first being mooted. I mean, I guess someone of my age, in my early 40s, who've seen that reality system that was in place up to the end of the 70s collapse and another one replace it really quite quickly as well. A situation where, unions with highly dominant society had to be a force to be reckoned with by any political party. Nationalised industries, put a major part of the country and the country's self-image. For that, within 1975 to the situation of 1985, only over a 10-year period, where there's widespread privatisation, the defeat of the most powerful union. That's an astonishing turnaround. But of course, it didn't just happen. There was both an intellectual project of this Leninist type, but there had to be the conditions in which that project could effectuate itself. Sure. There had to be the two things together, and I think as we can learn from this at the moment. The Naomi Klein analysis is right. In order to impose a new political ideology, you need conditions of trauma, but that's not enough in itself. You have to have the ideas ready to helicopter in, and those that was the situation with neoliberalism. Prefigurative politics, so to speak, almost in terms of you're prefigurating the crisis before it comes and when it does. And you're ready. You're ready on hand to impose your solution to it, and that's what's lacking for us, I think, at the moment. That there's a shock doctrine of capital itself. Capital itself is facing a total trauma. We don't have things that we're ready to roll out, and I think if we did have them, things might look different to what they are in a country dominated by capitalist realism. But that's the consequence of capitalist realism, and we can't just wish ourselves out of that. Although
since I wrote the book, things have massively changed in terms of the ideological atmosphere.
You must have written it in 2007, 2008, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
perfect timing.
Well, it was perfect or not. I mean, when I was writing it, when I was finishing it, it was like, why bother? Because of there was almost a feeling of, well, capitalism will collapse before I finish the book. Of course, that's not how things turned out. And yeah, it has turned out in a way to be perfect timing. Although in some ways, I think there are aspects of the book which have been, shown to be out of date. Actually, I think at least in some respects. I mean, a lot of the discussion of students and young people. I think one of the most encouraging things about the student movement last year. Well, I think the encouraging things was that one of the most, the most major kind of shift in the ideological atmosphere of this country had come from young people. Young people whose horizons were totally dominated by capitalism. Young people most of whom were born after 1989, and that I think that's part of what we're seeing, which is a countervailing shift against capitalist realism, yet to coalesce into an ideology which can sort of compete with the kind of relics of neoliberalism, as it were. But let's not ask too much too quickly.
I mean, have you? Previous guest on the show, a chap called Dan Hancock's. Have you read his book Kettled Youth?
Yeah, I have read it. Yes,
and he has a great quote. Just building what you said about the students. He says, "I think the pane of glass of capital, the first panes of glass of capitalist realism were shattered at Millbank," which I found really interesting. Actually, I concur with what you're saying in so much as, for me, capitalist realism is kind of summed up as a form of cultural, social, political inertia. And watching Millbank, something happened, and the idea of the event, which is again something you build on, which is elucidated very well by Alain Badiou, I thought was really, really pronounced. And I remember a particular sign as you walked into UCL during the occupation there, and I went, this is actually happening. Yeah, that's. And I mean,
I tried to, when I was doing my sort of blog posts on it, I think I was trying to fundamentally get that across, that it was literally unbelievable, because your all of your expectations about what life could be, about what politics could be, exactly those expectations, in fact, that are the substance of capitalist realism, had fallen apart, and we just couldn't believe what we were seeing. I think I compared it on my blog to those moments of exhilaration when you first recover from depression, which is not a metaphor. I think actually that's how things were. Depression is a state of extremely lowered expectations and kind of psychic inertia, where you don't expect anything to ever happen again. And you think, and it's not only that's worse than that, it's that you think not only will nothing ever happen again, it's that nothing ever really happened anyway, did it? And I think this was back to this Jamesonian sense of the end of history, or of this kind of last man perspective on things, which is part of this sort of broader postmodern phenomenology. Where it's not only that nothing will ever happen again, it's that, well, everything went wrong, didn't it really? It all ended up with Krispy Kreme donuts and shopping malls over the whole cosmos, and that's how it was always going to be, isn't it? And that's how everything will be forever. So I guess what I'm saying is that capitalist realism is totally flat with kind of psychic depression, I think, and it's no accident, as I try and say in the book. It's this kind of project I like to develop. Really, there's no accident that depression, particularly amongst young people, has been on the rise during the period of capitalist realism. I think the phrase that you had there, something is happening. That was in itself kind of produced an exhilaration of shock, or a shock of exhilaration. I think that because it's not. I think we're past the stage of this political inertia. Actually, it's that politics, the idea that politics could even matter in any way, that is what. That is what was missing, and
Not just that it could matter, but also it could even be sincere. I mean, the forms of protest were seen as kind of like either glib or cliche, but the idea that people who were apolitical coming onto the streets and genuinely caring about something, that's almost the entire country was sort of anathema. They were like, what the hell is going on? Yeah,
and we can see that the attempts to manage that by the capitalist realists, by Cameron, etc., was precisely to have this kind of appeal to time, temporality, actually. Yes, people used to do this sort of thing, and it's kind of quaint and that people do it now, but they'll learn. They'll learn about that this doesn't get you anywhere and it doesn't really work. But as we can see, those protests, much as Cameron and his ilk would like, the story they'd like to tell, those protests weren't some brief flurry that will that presage the sort of return to normality. That everything is cracking. Everything is cracking in that reality system, the recent riots are another dimension, and I expect to see things. I think we've seen nothing yet, actually.
No, I totally concur with you. At the moment, it's a very sort of strange purgatory at the moment where we're seeing this management by the state apparatus. There's a great quote I don't like to quote French radical texts written immediately after 2005, but there's a great quote in The Coming Insurrection where they go that the whole role of the state becomes to ensure that nothing actually happens, and to ensure that you have increased surveillance. And if you look at, for instance, the Notting Hill Carnival last week, the EDL this week, we've had 2 Section 60s issued across the whole of London. This is a piece of legislation that's meant to deal with a specified locality, and so the exception in maintaining the law is now becoming the law, i.e. breaking the law, doing things that supersede the law is now a necessary kind of a premise to uphold it, supposedly. So, so people like Schmidt and Agamben are very good on that. The system has actually got to the point where it's acknowledging problems, that it's actually now suspending the law in order to uphold its sort of spirit, which is, we see that, for instance, in Germany in 1933.
Yes, that's an ominous,
which is quite worrying. I'm
not
saying we're there, but I find that's something that's really. The BBC didn't even report this. You had 3,000 police officers deployed in at the EDL down in Tower Hamlets. Not a peep off the BBC. 3,000 police officers, and it's quite frightening actually when you think about it. Because what are the conditions under which the BBC doesn't report that kind of event? Yeah.
Yes, we can see there's a kind of. I think key to sort of Cameron is this attempt to look insouciant at all times. But beneath that is evidently massive desperation at the moment. Cameron surely is not the person to be that the Tories would have wanted leading them at this time. It seems to me that Cameron was a person, built for capitalist realism in the pre-2008 mode. Actually, it's a sad achievement of sort of New Labour and Blairism that they created the conditions for old Etonians to run the country again. Which you couldn't have had a Tory leader.
Well-meaning ones as well as the sort of quite tragically funny thing.
Yes, and you couldn't have had a leader like that, and they haven't had a leader like that for 50 odd years. The Tories. But I think Cameron's utterly out of his depth in this. He can't have anticipated, and they didn't anticipate the level of reality disintegration that is going on. Here was someone who's built for a world of Blairite PR, and that world is disappearing. He wasn't expecting to face major industrial unrest. He wasn't expecting to face student militancy. He wasn't expecting to face riots on the streets.
Let me ask you a question in terms of the media management, for instance, of Notting Hill Carnival. we had 274 arrests. We had 90 pre-arrests. We had, I think, 5,000 police officers deployed. We had a huge amount of undercover police officers. We had metal detectors on site. 274 arrests is clearly a big deal. A Section 60 issued across the whole city. Kids being stopped and searched in Tower Hamlets, supposedly, off the back of a Section 60 in Notting Hill, which is just bizarre. And then that's labelled almost throughout the entire press, the Telegraph, the Mail, the Sun, the Guardian, the BBC, you name it. It's labelled as a peaceful event.
Right.
In which case, my question to you is, if the media is classifying an event where 274 people are arrested and over 30 people hospitalised as peaceful, does that itself stand as a kind of totem to capitalist realism in so much as it's still having to persist with this myth of nothing's happening and that there isn't any sort of contention that's happening on the streets between the powers of authority and
Yeah, I think it's
otherwise.
It's. I think we can measure the sort of tenor of the times by the amount of effort that is now being required in order to make it look as if nothing is happening. Whereas before 2007, 2008, as it were, nothing was happening of its own accord. Now, the amount of straining of sinews that is required by the ruling class to maintain the image of stasis is itself evident that things are really changing. But I think we're now into a kind of bad authoritarian spiral where exactly those measures they're not likely to lead to long-term containment. In fact, they're likely to lead to exactly the problems which gave birth to them in the first place. Right? This is what happens with authoritarianism. Authoritarianism creates the condition for more authoritarianism by producing long-term discontent, lots of grievances, etc., etc. And the more they pursue that, the more the conditions which led to the discontent emerging will persist. Evidently, I think that particularly in terms of this question of reality management, in terms of the police are the good guys. That's a major story which they're sort of having to desperately persist with. And we could see with the riots how that. I think there was a cusp moment. Like the first. I think there's the early part of this year. I'm sort of losing track of the months. That's part of what's happening now is that one absolutely loses sense of time. But what I mean was, anyway, the two major kind of moments of kind of visible disintegration of the ruling class, which was, I think, they're still astonishing. I don't like to even call it Hackgate because, Hackgate, to use that kind of Watergate analogy, implies we're still in this postmodern time where we have to reference things that happened, 30, 40 years ago. And
history actually happened.
History's actually happening now, and I think that it seems to me this is of a bigger scale than Watergate potentially, and we shouldn't be comparing it to what happened then. The astonishing spectacle, the still astonishing spectacle. I don't think we've even processed this yet, of David Cameron having to stand up, at a press conference and saying, "Okay, there's major level corruption involving the police." Politicians and the media, and I'm in the centre of this. I'm part of it. The history itself, ironising, surely one of the most stupid slogans that a political party has come up with in recent times, that we're all in this together, taken a quite different meaning. Either we're all in this together, as in we're all a corrupt class. And Cameron having to stand up, things had got so bad and so visibly bad that he had to the best thing he could do at the time was say, "Yeah, it's true. Sorry," and then so that was one part of this crisis of the disintegration of a reality system, and the second part evidently has been the riots. That this doesn't happen here. We're in a post-political country. The riots like this happened years ago.
David Cameron said that, but Nick Clegg didn't. Nick Clegg in February 2010.
Right. Yes.
I don't like to sort of champion his political antennae, but he was saying that there would be riots in this country. Did he not? Madeline Bunting said it in The Guardian a little while back. It's been haphazardly said by the commentariat because all the variables seem there.
Exactly. Yeah.
But like you say, the English aren't really.
No, but I think it's a sort of strange country in a way in England, isn't it? In the sense of just. That is the sort of world capital of kind of resignation and inertia, and I think which is not unrelated to the fact that it is the first capitalist country. There's this kind of deep fatalism built in, I think, which is part of that. Yet at the same time, it's also the place where you get these sudden eruptions, and sort of empirically, one could expect this eruption to occur, but kind of affectively, how one felt after sort of years of nothing seeming to happen was that, okay, well, yeah, the conditions are there, but it won't actually occur. And that's part of this is really happening sense that, hang on, it is happening now. It just couldn't be contained. Clegg said it, I don't think Cameron would have wanted to believe it. And I think in some ways he still doesn't believe it's happening. Because it just doesn't fit into that PR capitalist realist simulation, which the only model they've got of politics is to keep that running.
Yeah.
They haven't got anything else.
I mean, I'll just say for the listeners, I mean, it's something of a trope within political discourse in this country. Talk about how sort of peaceful and non-violent the English working class are. But I mean, this is the country that I mean, let's go back all the way to AD 60. Boudicca tortures London.
Yeah.
And people say that women are downtrodden until you have the rise of sort of the liberal state. This is complete garbage. A lot of the leading figures in the warrior class of
Right.
sort of pre-Roman Britain were women. We won't go there. They burned down London. You've got the Peasants' Revolt, 1381, where common men from Kent and Essex come very, very close to killing the king, basically.
Right.
You've got the first revolution on the face of the planet, where people killed a king, not because he was a bad king. There's plenty of revolutions like that,
Yeah.
or rather revolts.
Yep.
But they killed a king because they were opposed to the idea of monarchy, and they liquidated an entire ruling class. This is about 139 years before the French go and do it.
Right.
So this is a country of radicals,
Exactly,
historically, but
but
somehow capitalist realism has kind of erased that from the collective memory. You know?
Because I think because there's kind of cyber-Gothic, isn't it, power in this country. It combines the most ancient kind of patronage with the most modern technology, and the sort of genius of the English ruling class is to backwards project this continuity, which is totally false. And one of the reasons that the time that we're living in is so exciting and also terrifying in many respects is that they're no longer able to suppress that counter history. Well, should we even call it a counter history? It is actually when things happen. And in many ways, you could say that the ruling class history is a counter history, because as we've said before, and as you've said and shown with many examples in the discussion, that their side is about stopping things from happening, really.
Because that's what's normally projected, isn't it? It's this kind of Whiggish interpretation of evolution, not revolution.
Right.
They sort of forget suffragettes, Chartism, swing rights, Gordon rights.
Well, I think Foucault is very good on this. The way that this is how power operates. Power operates by producing continuities where there was violence and violent and. It's not only a kind of physical violence, but also a kind of ontological violence of complete leaps into whole other expectations about what life could be. And that's why we oscillate in this country between those, anticipative insurrectionary moments and movements, and the insouciant kind of resignation. Nothing's ever happened in the whole history of the world, and that we can see this being fought out. We can see this struggle being fought out in the media and in our everyday lives at the moment. This week, by the time this is broadcast, who knows what will happen? That's why we can say that. We can. That's part of the times we're living in now. We just don't know that. How long what is at the amount of time when we're talking a period of relative stability again. We don't know how long that's going to continue, and we don't know what will be the next thing to crack.
I mean, so around the time of the student movement, I was incredibly optimistic.
Yeah.
Because I thought I still believe this. On December 9th, if there was any US backing for a student protest, it wouldn't have been 35,000. It would have been 70,000.
Right.
And God only knows what that would have achieved.
Yeah.
And now I'm a little bit more hesitant, in so much as I think the level of social decomposition instigated by neoliberalism is so great that any kind of recomposed socius, any kind of recomposed society that's now going to step into this vacuum that's been left by neoliberalism, which has sought to commodify every single human relationship. When civil society has been so utterly decomposed, how does it recompose itself? So the riots, for me, signified a very, very systematically decomposed society, decomposed along the issues of race, of language, of you name it. And I mean, it's a consequence of a number of things: globalization, as time-space compression, things we won't go into, changes in identity. Bauman's very good on this. Liquid identity, the idea that even one's identity, even the ontology of the self, is something that's fundamentally undermined.
Yes.
When things have been so systematically decomposed, I mean, how do things go forward? Because now I'm beginning to look at the riots and think, actually, for a long time to come, this is the shape of things to come, so to speak. I mean,
Well, actually, it was a very interesting event last week at the Tate Modern, which was the showing of the Black Audio Film Collective's film from 1986, Handsworth Songs. And a lot of the discussion naturally around that event was the continuities and discontinuities between the riots in Tottenham in 1985 and and recently. And John O'Comfort from the Black Audio Collective, Film Collective, was saying, well, look, he has confidence that a group of people who can bring the British state to its knees can at some point organise themselves. And I think that is that's what I believe. That the riots, the riots themselves, I think, why they stop short of being, of course they're political causes, but I think they remained symptomatic, actually. And I think the definition of political agency will be ceasing to be a symptom. And, that was what was lacking. So this kind of sense of a rage without a kind of a counter-narrative, as it were, or any kind of narrative in a way. But I don't think that we should give up on the idea that the narratives can't be provided, or the people won't provide them for themselves.
I wouldn't say give up. In many ways, it's quite an exciting project to think that we've I can't recollect who says this. It's quite an interesting ultra-leftist text. They say we have no ancestors, and I find that a really exciting project. Actually, I find that awe-inspiring because that really gives meaning to people's lives. Actually, in terms of building things historically, it's really important and it's amazing. So I'm not worried about it to that extent. I'm in the short to medium term, but longer term, I'm not worried about it. But what I find disconcerting is, I'll give you an example. I was at a wildcat strike recently by Latin American cleaners at Senate House, just in the University of London. There were primarily Latin Americans. It was primarily, I think, Ecuadorians, other Latin Americans there. And people were turning up and they were handing out, SWP turned up and they were giving out their newspapers. And these people can't speak English.
Right.
The papers were fundamentally meaningless to them. I went to another thing the day after that, and it was a meeting at outside Southwark Town Hall, and it was primarily second-generation Afro-Caribbean, and a lot of locals, a lot of Caucasians, activists, really good mix. And then somebody was giving out African nationalist newspaper, and you've got all these kinds of different energies coming out. You've got black nationalism, you've got obviously diaspora immigrant workers here, you've got 100,000 Brazilians apparently in London, you've got Latin Americans, you've got sort of dispossessed children of a previously middle class white milieu who will never have the standards of living of their parents. You have the elderly, you have all of these kinds of, you have the breakdown of the family unit, you have a highly degendered workplace, you have all of these things. I just think the idea of a project where all of those energies and antagonisms not come together, because obviously they want to achieve their own unique things and their own different forms of emancipation. But the idea that you're going to have a propositional project stem from that particularly quickly is quite worrying. Manuel Castells is very good in this. He talks about what's going to take us forward beyond the dispute between capital and labour is identities and identity politics, and that will actually become far more than it's been hitherto, which is like a kind of post-political project. He says that'll inform really interesting subjectivities now. But what does that mean? Does that mean the rise of the far right? Does that mean?
Yeah, I think this is exactly the terrain where the struggle is taking place. And these are exactly the problems. Decomposition of the older forms of sociality, older forms of sort of association of working people, etc., etc. But I think we sort of need a shift from the kind of melancholic decline that I'm not suggesting you're.
No, I'm as optimistic as they come. Don't worry.
I'm not suggesting you're impugning, but anyway, this is our default position on the left. Is we once were strong, now we are weak. All of the conditions that led to our power have been taken away. And where I agree with Alan Badiou, I think, is in the idea that that sequence is now exhausted itself. the movement through Leninism, etc., and the sort of also the revolt against Leninism that we saw in the various modes of the new left after the 60s, etc. That's sort of come to its conclusion because in lots of ways even the movement against Leninism presupposed the kind of Leninist infrastructure of the party, etc., which was there. And now we are back to this. This is the thing that we have no ancestors, I think. That we're now back to, I think the analogy is with the origins of the workers' movement when there was nothing in lots of ways. Of course, once things are constellated or are put together, then it turns out actually, of course, there were ancestors, but they weren't clear at the time. And what you're describing could equally well be seen as the excellent preconditions for a new type of movement, which I'm not going to say I know what that is, but I think that's part of. We have to take seriously partly why the attack on capitalist realism isn't an ethical attack on people sort of morally failing and just going along with capital. Is that this is genuine cognitive deficit that we suffer from, actually, that a cognitive and imaginative deficit that the domination of kind of capitalist realism has produced, and that it's very difficult for us to imagine what these forms of what these new forms of organisation, institution, struggle might be. Yet, we can. They're starting to emerge. Possibly, they're starting to emerge, and that I think you mentioned earlier the sort of Bauman notion of the liquid. I think a powerful idea that's been sort of developed by my comrade Alex Williams is not plasticity, actually. So instead of the kind of old brick-like solidarity that was a kind of guiding metaphor of the labour movement under Fordism, what we need is a kind of, as Alex puts it, post-Fordist plasticity, actually. Whereas, what I like about this image is that it isn't the total atomistic decomposition of a liquid state, yet it also isn't the old sort of fixed solid state either. There is, as it were, sufficient consistency and sufficient solidity in order to get things done, and maybe that movements on that basis are what is necessary, particularly because up against capital, which is kind of, as it were, ontologically totalizing, but sort of actually empirically kind of an admixture of many different, an ensemble of different things, and maybe we need something similar. That is a whole ensemble of different strategies that can come together enough to challenge capital.
But I mean, so let me put a proposition towards you. So the etymology of the word religion comes from the Latin the verb ligare, which means to bind together.
Yes. And
the whole kind of proposition there is that religion is the kind of it's what maintains social order. It's what maintains a kind of a collective identity amongst adherents. And without that, so the thinking was, for instance, amongst Roman political legal theorists, was without religion, without the thing that held the community together, it would fall apart. So I think what we have to think about is, in light of the seeming death of the organised labour movement as it was, in light of the breakdown of the family unit, heterosexual norms, gendered norms, religious norms, are those projects we've got to embark on together far more problematic, far deeper than perhaps people were saying a year ago? I mean, in terms of new forms of collectivity, new forms of shared identity, it's a huge project, isn't it? I mean, at least the old socialist movement had, it still reproduced the gender relations of capitalism. It reproduced the Christian tenets of capitalism, whereas this is a whole new kind of terrain. I mean, there's very, very few forms of deep collectivity that we have now.
But no, that's true. But surely all of those things that are declined, we should be celebrating.
I would, but that's... Sort of, I'm not David Cameron here,
No, of course, I know, and I'm not suggesting you are, but I think part of how we've been boxed in is the kind of Fordist blackmail, you might say. You say, okay, this is how we sort of get trained to think, or how we, not so much we trained to think as how we fall into this way of thinking. That, okay, Fordism's pretty bad in lots of ways. I mean, just the level of work itself is boring, and as you
doesn't
say,
get said enough, does it?
No, But this was the Fordist compact, wasn't it? You know, that you will be bored, but you'll be paid relatively well, and you also have a relative amount of, well, certainly a much greater amount of security than workers can expect now. Okay, so you know, not only will work be boring, and let's keep saying it, but it will also be dominated by men, and alongside it will be all of those other things like the family, albeit in a somewhat broken down form from the extended families that preceded heterosexual normativity, etc., etc. And then, so it's as if then that the price of the collapse of all of those oppressive dimensions of Fordism was the collapse of any sort of progressive political project whatsoever, ironically. That so it's as if, like, okay, well those things have disintegrated, but so has the labour movement as well. But surely again, rather than seeing as those things as problems, we have to think of those things as preconditions for a new kind of politics, and something which we absolutely should celebrate. And that, I mean, it seems to me this is, again, I think you've highlighted what is the key terrain of struggle, particularly with the right. People like, it's no accident that people like Philip Blond or Morris Glassman have to bang on about tradition. Because they know that they know that some supplement is required, as it were, to exactly that religious crisis of authority. Poses very serious problems. But it seems to me that it's very clear that their solutions are utter pie in the sky fantasy and not realistic at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this to me seems an opportunity for us, actually, that a post-familial, post-religious concept of the public. Okay, this for me is what I think we need to be articulating at this time, and that the public isn't the state either, and that that's what I mean about the disintegration of these things should be an opportunity for us to posit this, given that there's nothing political about their solutions that always end up in moralism. You know, when Blond talks about when Blond actually does appropriate massive amounts of sort of rhetoric and discourse around self-organisation, etc. When he appropriates that, he does so. And what is it that makes him a conservative then? Not the idea that workers should be autonomous and that management structure should be flatter and all that kind of thing. No, it's the idea that the social conditions for this autonomy are traditional and ultimately religious forms of authority. I think we can say that actually different forms of authority are possible. That what is not only possible, then they're the only ones that could exist, right? Because those they can. It's this kind of magical voluntarism that they hope that if we all sort of believe enough and want enough those structures to come back, that they will come back. But there's good reasons, there's good structural and kind of also political reasons that the family is in decline, and good riddance to it in lots of ways. I mean, it's not. It's what's gone alongside. I mean, I think where Blond is right, actually, is in targeting the sort of space between the private individual and the state, as it were, and parliamentary politics. This is he's right that this is the area that has been disengaged under neoliberalism. But what he wants to populate that with is this whole traditional set of institutions that are ultimately religious and moralistic. I think we need to populate it with other kinds of institutions and organisations which we did have before, and which I don't think are necessarily. Well, I don't think at all are dependent on Fordism. We can associations of precarious workers constituting a public space. This is eminently plausible, I think.
I mean, so this. I mean, I was having a very interesting conversation with a very dear friend of mine recently, and he was entirely concordant with what you were saying. He was going, Blond. I actually think in the medium term, Blond is probably the best the right has got, because he's got an excellent analysis. It comes from almost a Marxist historian's kind of perspective on things. Got very good analysis sometimes some things, but so his kind of his solutions are, like you say, a return to religious normativity, heterosexual normativity, the family, That's clearly not going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to me actually that's the best the right can do right now, is to say we need to go back literally to the 1930s, from whether it be austerity aesthetics or a return of national service or religious normativity. It's absolutely bizarre.
But I think that's a hegemonic opportunity
for
us, though. They haven't. That's really important. That's really important. All they've got to offer is ideas they've nicked off us, like of worker self-organisation and autonomy, and that's that is a major weakness, because there's nothing remotely realistic about that.
It's just not happening. It's just not happening.
It's not going to happen, and it won't happen. You can't. And also, this is the problem that Cameron's got whenever he tries to spout this familial stuff, is that there's no political mechanism for reviving the family. What was it that 20p a week or whatever he was trying to offer to motivate people to stay in families? I mean, there isn't a mechanism for doing that. But then. It is an opportunity for us, since that's the best. You say that is the best they've got, actually, and this is the problem that with all of the nonsense around the big society is it's just not political, and it's based on and there are no political mechanisms which can bring it about, and that's obvious. So it's just like people do stuff. That is the policy of the government. The policy of the government is just do things, and we'll, that's what is Osborne's economic policy? It's come on, private sector, do stuff. There's no mechanism for stimulating.
I mean, that's hardly surprising. I mean, the chap's only job is folding up jumpers and Selfridges. I mean, that's not really, it's true. I mean, the guy's never had a paycheck outside the Conservative Party.
Right.
I mean, this is what's happening. I mean, this isn't even ruled by an aristocracy, a competent aristocracy like we saw in the 19th century.
No, I think it is. I think it's genuine decadence.
Yeah.
I think what you've got is. The analysis of people like Mario Tronti, etc., that in a way capital, that the strength of capital was came out of its response to working class movements, where it was required to be dynamic in response to those. But I guess the weakness of the working class movements has led to this kind of utter decadence in the ruling class, and this hasn't counted against them. Because the structural conditions were such that it didn't really matter. That everything was just this kind of empty-headed administration that even an idiot like Blair could do. Now they're actually required to respond again, and they're not capable of it. And that is now a serious problem for them, I think, this kind of decadence.
Well, I mean, I find it, quite comical but also tragic that we have a return to government by aristocracy. And if you mean, so a lot of people are sort of obviously opposed that, as am I, but has a great history. You think of Cicero in Rome. You think of the great 19th century statesman in this country. You think of Keynes; he was Eton educated.
Yeah.
So there is aristocracy, although it's been self-selecting, has produced quite competent leaders. Even Churchill, to an extent, as an orator. But when you have a parliament that's full of PR men and chick-lit authors like what's her name, Louise Bagshaw, Louise Mensch. I mean, this is just tragic. And I mean, you genuinely have a huge social, economic, and political crisis in this country, and the moral arbiters. Chick-lit authors. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up.
No, you couldn't make it up. And what a pathetic spectacle, in every sense of the word spectacle, when, the hopes of the nation for interrogating one of the most powerful and corrupt sort of families in the world lay on the shoulders of Louise Mensch. That is satire right there, and also kind of sad. That's the situation that is we've been reduced to.
I just want to move on to a quick point.
Yeah.
So you're saying about we now need to look at new forms of the public that are post-Christian, post-familial.
Yeah.
So that's almost a return then to the kind of 68 post-Marxist trend,
yeah.
Which I think was very successfully hijacked actually by the New Right post-79.
Yeah, absolutely was.
So the idea that there's it's all about sort of not satiating personal desire, but how can I put this? Forming public discourse and the public around the needs, the preferences and the desire of the individual, whilst also appreciating the needs, preferences, desire of the other. So that was entirely hijacked by Thatcher within this discourse of the formation of the self through market preference, through consumption as the good life. Do you think it's then possible to reappropriate those
yes, I do. Absolutely do think that. I don't think it's just the 68 moment. I think another key document is the 1989-1990 New Times book, which was, people like come from the British tradition of cultural studies, like Stuart Hall, etc., themselves trying to wrestle with this problem of hegemonizing post-Fordism. Now, in lots of ways, at a certain point, it could look like that project was only going to end in one place, which was New Labour. And many of the people involved with that project, the New Times project,
Martin Jack and Jeff Morgan.
Yeah, many of those characters did go on to become New Labour ideologues, right? And but I think it's a mistake to think that was the only way that had to go. The only way that all of those ideas, those ideas, the potentiality of those ideas was entirely exhausted by their appropriation by New Labour or neoliberalism. I think that, as it were, that was the only way things were going to go in the conditions of the 90s and the early part of the 21st century. But what we need to do in the new conditions in which we now live, where neoliberalism is massively on every level discredited, we can go back to what people, I think, wanted but didn't get. When people wanted to break out of, Stalinism, Leninism, the kind of decadence of social democracy, the miserable boredom of Fordism, they didn't want, they didn't just want Krispy Kreme donuts, satellite TV and all of that. They wanted something else, and they couldn't get it in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. But there is no weakness of that political project that it was appropriated by the right. It's the strength of that project, I think. The only way to go, the only way any successful ideology was going to go was by appropriating those ideas. It's appropriate them without exhausting them, is what I would say. So if we return to them and think about, okay, what is a kind of post-Fordism or post-Fordism, which is not neoliberalism? What would that look like? Because there is no other way. I think there's no, the temptations to go back to Lenin, the kind of nostalgic comfort food of old style Leninism or Stalinism. It's just a comedy. It's just a comedy. No, or an acting out. No one really thinks that's going to happen. Also, there's something fundamentally undesirable about those positions. And really, instead of hankering, instead of accepting this blackmail, either it's back to something which was unsatisfactory and which ultimately ran out of steam of its own accord, rather than that, or some neoliberal-dominated modernity based on choice, consumerism, etc. It's that very opposition between those two things which we have to contest. I
mean, we'll do a quick thing about the riots. So you said about happiness. There's a really interesting point that I think was consistently made during the riots. People saying, in their more sincere moments, they said when they saw the rioters, they said they were incredibly happy and joyous. I had a friend compare what happened in Peckham. Not all of it. There's things like arson, things like this, but a lot of the people who were bystanders watching it, maybe their friends were involved, were happy. And there's a great book that's just come out from the Free Association called Moments of Excess. And it's in those moments of excess that people reimagine the world, they reimagine themselves, and those moments where social relations, the everyday, is just wholly deconstituted. People are kind of almost utopians, albeit very, very temporarily. And it's a very, very, very interesting kind of glimpse into utopia and how things otherwise could be. And people, they were saying they were incredibly happy. So people were saying the same thing with the student movement. They were saying, I slept on a floor for 3 weeks. I've never been happier. That's utopia. That's infinitely preferable to being on £250,000 a year living in Canary Wharf. So what kind of, how do we get more people to have those kinds of collective experiences? So the students had it. People have had it in a way that's obviously compromising the rule of law, and I'm not ever going to say do this or that, but that's clearly not tenable for the whole of society. So how else? You've got 1 minute just to say very briefly. How else do you think people can capture those glimpses through access to a world that's different to what we have to engage with?
Well, I think the issue with these things is I'm going to answer with that another question rather than giving an answer there. I think it's how do we make these things sustainable, right? And what are the infrastructures which could sustain this kind of this what seems to be excess, this inrushing of feeling of the real, I think, which is part of this thing of this is actually happening, I think it's a range of strategies, which some of which we don't yet know. To be honest, it's a question of new forms of coordination. I think is the issue for me. Like how do things which I think like the right, we have to be opportunistic as well. Like these things, we don't know exactly when they're going to arise, but when they do arise, we need to be ready to take advantage, coordinate, and fit them together. I know that's not a very specific answer, but I think for me it's not necessarily about having the answers at the moment. It's about having the right kind of questions, really, and that's why I'm saying that we're in this moment of that the trade unions didn't exist at a certain time, then they did exist, and what is it what kind of body could that does not yet exist could operate in such a way as to coordinate these new desires. It's something we have to work on, and we need I think we need all kinds of resources there, including resources of fiction, in order to get out of the kind of cognitive deadness and imaginative deadness which kind of capitalist realism has imposed on us.
Well, it's been good talking to you, Mark.
Thank you.
I think maybe I'm sort of disposed to a sort of almost pseudo-Hegelian position at the moment, like you are. Like, let's just see things unfold. And I think there's a lot more to be learned and sort of questions to be asked as opposed to answers to be sort of formed.
I think is that we need to work on
the next few.
I think we need to work on these questions, but I just don't think we have the answers yet. We need to think about them.
God, heaven forbid, you want the questions to be as big and as challenging as possible. Thank you very much. My name's Aaron Peters. This is Novara. I will see you same time, same place next week. Bye.